A Very Merry Match by Melinda Curtis. Prologue. I want to match Darcy Harper. Edith, chorused the three mature females who made up the Sunshine Valley Widows Club board. Why are you upset? Edith Archer demanded, trying to sit as tall as she could at the card table, height not being one of her assets. I thought we were here to choose someone who needs help falling in love. She'd overheard her three friends at a Widows Club Thanksgiving potluck yesterday discussing their intent to give Cupid a helping hand this holiday season. Since it sounded like something she'd be interested in, Edith had dropped by because Mims, Bitsy, and Clarice often forgot to extend an invitation her way. You can't choose Darcy. Bitsy's head shook so hard her black velvet hair bow slid lower on her bobbed blonde hair. For one thing, she's married. And if you must know, we give priority to matching widows and widowers. That's a rule. Clarice shouted, having left her hearing aids at home. She shuffled a deck of cards. Like having to be on the Widows Club board to participate in the matchmaking. I come to all the board meetings. Edith shifted in her seat, wishing Mims had cushioned folding chairs. Therefore, I'm on the board. There was another uproar. Clarice's cards spewed like a fountain across the table. Bitsy's bow fell to the floor. Mims stared up at her husband's tall, hand-carved gun case, mouth moving as if having a silent conversation with Ham. Edith sat patiently through it all. If possession was 9/10 of the law, then attendance should count the same. When her husband died last winter, she'd needed an anchor. The Widows Club board had helped keep her grounded. Yes, they sometimes overlooked her, but their hearts were in the right place. And she'd been tickled to learn they had a secret purpose and a code name, the Sunshine Valley Matchmakers Club. They were a club, Sunshine Valley's version of the secret society in the Da Vinci Code. Only they operated for good, not greed. Edith, Mims said in her firm voice, pausing to chew off more of her lipstick as she tried to fluff her white, short, flat curls. Some may question Darcy's choice in husband. Darcy was in her early 20s and had married Judge Harper, who was pushing 80. But that's not why we're here. You can't mean to let Edith have a vote. Bitsy stopped trying to fix her hair bow. She was always perfectly coiffed, even if stuck in 80s fashion trends. Leg warmers had never been Edith's thing. But with Bitsy's words, Edith experienced a rare moment of gut-shaking doubt that things wouldn't go the way she wanted them to. She stared at Mims pleadingly through eyes filling with unexpected tears. Listen closely, Edith. Clarice used her outdoor voice and pointed at Mims and her neon orange camouflage sweatshirt. President. She pointed at Bitsy and her red, silk-covered, linebacker shoulder pads. Treasurer. She jabbed a thumb at her pink and yellow paisley blouse. Secretary. And then she faced Edith. Which means you're Vice President, Edith interrupted with a relieved laugh. Thank heavens. She'd found a slot to fill. Boards always have a vice president. A second in command. Edith's chest swelled with importance. Her pronouncement was met with silence. They were probably all stunned they hadn't seen this before. I vote we table the issue of vice presidency to a later date, Mims mumbled. Second. Bitsy went back to her hair bow and then shouted at Clarice. Deal the cards. We'll figure things out later. Clarice frowned. As a flower child, she'd seen a lot of sun in her day, and when she frowned, her thin face thickened with sun-spotted wrinkles. There are rules. Mims waved her hand the way she did with the board when Edith got her way. Frowning, Clarice settled her long gray braids over her shoulders. You have to win a game of poker before you can propose a name. Preferably the name of a widow or widower, Bitsy said, hair bow in place. Who's been widowed at least a year, Mims added, gaze drifting back to the locked case of hunting rifles. That could almost be me. Suddenly, Edith had mixed feelings about the game. She'd practically earned a coveted seat on the board. What if the winner of the poker game chose to match her? We tend to focus on the younger widows, Mims explained. Oh. Edith blew out a relieved breath. We could make an exception, Bitsy murmured. With a snort, Clarice began to deal. Ante up. Each of the widows had 10 pennies in front of them. Edith laid 2 pennies in the middle of the card table. Clink clink. 1, 2. Buckle my shoe. The mood in the room was too serious for her liking. After a moment's hesitation, Mims slid out 2 pennies. 3, 4. Shut the door. Edith beamed. Clarice stopped dealing cards to stare at Mims and Bitsy. This is a bad idea. You're right, Edith said, grateful the conversation had turned. Gambling is never to be condoned. My grandson-in-law did a good bit of it before he died. How is Mary Margaret doing? Bitsy sorted her cards. The first holidays are always tough. Mims directed her soft words toward Edith, who nodded, thinking about the empty side of her own bed instead of her granddaughter's. I'm lucky to have such good family and friends around, especially the Widows Club. Edith turned a warm smile toward Bitsy. Did you forget to ante up? Bitsy contributed her 2 cents. Widows roll with the punches. 5, 6. Pick up sticks, Edith sing-songed. I'm afraid of what comes next. Clarice finished dealing. She set the deck of cards aside and tossed her 2 pennies on the pile. 7, 8. Lay them straight. Edith beamed at her friends. And then she beamed at her cards, splaying them on the table. 4 queens. Who can beat me? The original 3 board members groaned. That's not the way poker is played. Mims exhaled, long and slow. This isn't going to work. Agreed. Bitsy crossed her arms. Yap. Can't play without protocol. Clarice stood, reaching for her wooden walking stick. She'd been using it since her double knee replacement last year. I have to go. Bitsy got to her feet, adjusting her listing shoulder pads. I forgot I have thing. Mims had no excuse to leave since they were at her house. She stood anyway. I win? Edith happily raked in her coins. She should have known she'd prevail. Edith had always been lucky. I thought we'd play until someone had all the pennies. But if not, I'll choose Mary Margaret. Because the anniversary of her granddaughter's husband's death was Christmas. You can't choose, Clarice said in her loud voice. It goes against the rules. And being secretary, Clarice was a stickler for the group's rules. All right. Then who will we match? Edith looked at each of the board in turn, hoping they wouldn't point to her. I thought Mary Margaret was the perfect choice. The rest of the board fell silent. And in that dead space, Edith realized it didn't matter who won their 40-cent game of poker. They'd all had Mary Margaret on their mind. Chapter 1. Mary Margaret Sneed was going to find some holiday spirit if it killed her. It had been a rough year. Her husband, Derek, had died last Christmas after a second bout with cancer, leaving her with an unexpected pile of debt, no life insurance policy, and only her kindergarten teacher's salary to set things right. Fulfill your obligations. Mary Margaret hadn't heard her father's voice anywhere but in her head in more than 5 years. It still had the power to chill her. She shut him out by humming the chorus of Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. Memories might not be doing much to bolster Mary Margaret's spirits, but Mother Nature was. It had been snowing for 3 days in sunshine. There was 2 feet of snow on the ground, more alongside the road where the plows had run. It was only 2 days past Thanksgiving, but it looked like Christmas. Mary Margaret shoveled her walk, made a small snowman, and got out the rickety wooden ladder to string colorful lights along the eaves of her small rented bungalow. Her street was lined with historic craftsman homes painted everything from light blue to forest green to sunny yellow and would soon be decorated with lights and lawn displays. Small-town life in High Plains, Colorado was all about heritage and tradition, even if you were only going through the motions. "Good to see you, Mary Margaret." Kimmy easily waved from across the street. She was going all out with a nativity scene and spotlights. "If you need help setting up your tree, let me know." "Will do," Mary Margaret said. She didn't think she was up to indoor cheer, not when she decorated for Christmas around Derek's hospital bed last December. "Now that's going to look pretty at night." Mary Margaret contorted herself on the ladder to see who was coming up the walk. Two men wearing black leather jackets approached. One man was tall, thin, balding, and chewed a plastic coffee stir stick the way cigarette smokers did when they were trying to quit. The other man was hardy to his partner's laurel. Shorter, stockier, and with the kind of features that said he hadn't had enough to smile about in life. Neither was a local. Mary Margaret may not have grown up in Sunshine, but, as a 5-year resident, she knew everyone in town, at least by sight. "Are you Mrs. Sneed?" Mr. Hardy asked with the narrow-eyed look of an amateur detective. At her nod, Mr. Laurel said, "Sorry about your loss, ma'am." "Derek." He was. The man stopped. Mary Margaret's chest locked, refusing to take in air. Over the past 11 months, she'd learned the lack of words to describe her husband usually meant he'd borrowed money and hadn't paid someone back. Derek had faced his mortality armed with the balm of retail therapy. He hadn't just bought things online, in stores, and at dealerships. He bought things from friends in town, promising to pay later, knowing full well that he'd never see a later date. Drawing a deep breath, Mary Margaret climbed down the ladder, took a stand in the snow, and pushed up her sweatshirt sleeves. "Gentlemen, I hope you're here to tell me Derek had a lottery ticket he never claimed." She could tell by the lack of change in their expressions that this wasn't the case. Hardy planted his feet wider than his shoulders on her walk and hinged his hips from side to side. "We represent a company that floated your husband money." "Loaned," Mr. Laurel clarified, swiveling the red stir stick from one side of his mouth to the other. "Derek had a line of credit." Fellas. They'd dropped in her estimation from gentlemen to random dudes. "My husband has been gone nearly a year. In all that time, I've received many invoices for his debt." "Have you billed me already?" "What's the name of your company?" Shrugging deeper into his jacket, the tall Mr. Laurel gestured toward the front door and the plastic holly wreath hanging there. "Can we go inside and discuss this?" No, the rejection was instinctual. Her creepometer was pinging off the charts. These weren't your average bill collectors. Their tans and thin jackets said they'd come from a warmer climate. "So, here's the thing, guys. If my husband owed you money, you need to prove it with receipts, contracts, or invoices." She'd learned that in the early weeks after Derek passed. "Mrs. Sneed." Mr. Hardy's hips did that unsettling side-to-side mamba. "Last December, your husband lost $100,000 to our online gambling casino." Mary Margaret gripped the ladder, trying to steady herself in the shifting snow. "We've been trying to get in touch with him through the usual channels," Mr. Hardy continued. "Cell phone, which she'd cancelled, and email, which she didn't have the password to." "That can't be true." "My husband only gambled at the Indian casino down the road." But she could tell by their expressions this wasn't a joke. Mr. Laurel swiveled the red plastic stick in his mouth and handed her a stapled set of papers. "Blackjack online gaming. Account for Derek Sneed. Debt validation notice." No physical address was listed for Derek, just his email. There were 14 days of transactions listed in December of last year. That alone didn't mean much. It was the debt validation notice that legitimized their claim in Mary Margaret's eyes. The bottom of her small world fell out. Oh, Derek. Her husband hadn't handled cancer well. At the news of his first diagnosis 3 years ago, Derek had said he didn't want to be married anymore. He'd taken Karina Snodgrass, his high school sweetheart, to Las Vegas with no indication that he was ever coming back. After 2 weeks, he'd returned to Sunshine without Karina, and Mary Margaret had taken him back because it was the right thing to do. Marriage is a sacred bond. But things hadn't been the same. Mary Margaret rubbed her temple, trying to get her father's voice out of her head, but, as usual, he slipped in the last word: always fulfill your obligations. A little over a year after his cancer all clear, Derek had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. This time, he swore his love for Mary Margaret. That hadn't stopped him from going on a spending spree the day they diagnosed him as terminal. Among other things, he bought a 70-inch flat screen, a fancy laptop, an all-terrain quad, a fishing boat, and a new pickup truck. And then when his body began shutting down, he'd coerced his friends into taking him gambling, betting big in the hopes he'd win enough to square Mary Margaret away. Derek had been as unlucky in the casino as with his health. She'd tried to return and sell everything after he died. The truck and fishing boat had been returned with what she'd felt was an unreasonable restocking fee. The all-terrain quad had been sitting in the driveway with a for sale sign for nearly a year. And now this. Here's the thing, Mrs. Sneed. Mr. Hardy was gleefully fidgety. We tried in good faith to contact your husband. We aren't completely heartless regarding your loss. He tried to look sad. Tried, but failed. Do you own this place? No, some of the bitterness she tried not to feel toward Derek slipped out. She'd had to sell their starter home last spring. How much will it take to buy his debt down? She'd learned that debt collectors would settle for less than the full amount just to get it off their books. This isn't a sale at Macy's, Mrs. Sneed. Mr. Hardy's good humor evaporated. His words were as chilly as the 30-degree air. We want our 100 grand. Mary Margaret twitched so hard that the ladder fell sideways into the snow. We'll be needing a good faith payment today. Mr. Laurel walked a few feet into the snowdrift and righted her ladder. Mary Margaret cleared her throat. Gentlemen. She decided to upgrade their status in the hopes of leniency. I've spent months consolidating Derek's debt. I'm on a very strict payment plan. I could maybe add $50 a month for you. She was grasping at straws. Their heads swung slowly from side to side. We'll be needing a good faith payment today, Mr. Laurel repeated. Mary Margaret only had $200 in her checking account. But she wasn't the most beloved kindergarten teacher in Sunshine for nothing. She was a quick thinker and had a winning smile. Can I interest you in a quad? She gestured to the vehicle to the side of her driveway. The one with the faded for sale sign. They shook their heads. We plan to stay in town until a sizable portion has been paid, Mr. Hardy said. Our boss wants us back in the office before Christmas. He stared at her blue jean-clad legs. And it wasn't the admiring kind of look a man gave a woman's gams. It was the kind of look a kindergarten boy gave to a popsicle stick before he tried to snap it in half. Daddy, are you sure Santa likes Christmas trees with toy cars? 5-year-old Tad wrapped a red sports car with a white pipe cleaner and hung it on the ficus in Kevin's office. I never see trees with cars. His small brow wrinkled. Or ninjas. His role-playing favorite. Sunshine Mayor Kevin Hadley stopped working on the road repaving budget and turned his chair to face his son. Do you know what Santa likes? Tad solemnly shook his head. Santa likes Christmas to be fun and full of surprises. Surprises weren't so fun to politicians. Like the news that your wife had been unfaithful. Or that she considered you boring, in and out of the bedroom. Or that, despite all that, she still wanted to be married to you. As if your shared aspirations of climbing the political ladder to Washington, D.C., could survive that. Their divorce was final. Ironically, that had coincided with his party floating an invitation to run for state assembly from his district. All Kevin had to do was tell them he was ready and pass a few background checks and interviews to earn their support. Not one to leap before he analyzed the situation, Kevin hadn't told anyone about the conversation, not even his parents. What are you going to get me for Christmas? Tad brought a fire truck over and stood at Kevin's side, trying to look innocent and reinforcing all the love Kevin had in his heart for him. "I'd do anything for Tad." On the outside, Tad was a precocious, sturdy kid, big for his age. On the inside, he was made fragile by his parents' divorce, struggling a bit at school and seeking attention more than he had in the past. "All I can tell you is this, Tad." Kevin leaned down and whispered, "The present you'll get is a surprise." "Daddy." Tad climbed into Kevin's lap, continuing to wrap the fire truck with a pipe cleaner. Footsteps sounded on the staircase from the first floor of the town hall. His father filled the doorway, still looking vital and hale at 60 years, despite his white hair. "Kevin, I need a moment." "Grandpa." Tad tumbled to the floor and scrambled across the room to hug him before returning to decorate the ficus. "I've only got a minute, Dad. I have a meeting with Everett." He and his city manager had decided to convene on the Saturday after Thanksgiving to speak their minds on the controversial development project they were supporting. "How did you get in?" Kevin was sure he'd locked the door downstairs behind him. "I used my key." Dad shrugged. He'd once been mayor too. Politics and furniture making had been family businesses for 3 generations. "Listen, about this distribution center you're considering." Kevin sighed. Since he'd been elected nearly a decade earlier, everything about his public service had been smooth sailing, approved and embraced by almost everyone. And then came the dissolution of his marriage and JPM Industries' proposal to build a distribution center on the outskirts of town. Now everyone had an opinion about his life and his leadership. "It's the wrong choice for Sunshine." Dad moved his hands as if smoothing a tablecloth one final time before company arrived. End of story, Dad meant. It was far from the end for Kevin. "Do you want to elaborate on that?" Because everyone in Sunshine was telling Kevin it was the wrong thing for the town, but no one would articulate why. "We're a small ranching community." Which was essentially code for Dad not liking change. The distribution center would bring much-needed jobs and tax revenue to Sunshine, not to mention it would look good on Kevin's political resume. He'd need that to make the move to the state level. "Thanks for your input, Dad." Before his father could accelerate his DEFCON level to emergency mode, Kevin turned the conversation in a new direction. "Are you out shopping with Mom?" "You know, I told her not to spoil Tad. Their only grandchild." "I wrote a long list to Santa," Tad said, right on cue. "Miss Sneed mailed our class letters to the North Pole last week." Kevin made a mental note to ask Mary Margaret what had been on Tad's long list, although something ninja-related was a safe bet. Grandma was going into the pet store. Kevin's father ruffled Tad's dark brown hair. "She promised not to buy anything." A twinge of worry plucked a muscle in the shoulder of Kevin's throwing arm, threatening to cramp. Rosalie had poodle puppies for adoption in the window. And she was one of the best salespeople in town. "Given I'm never home during the day, any pup she picks up will be living at your place from 8 to 5. "Your mother knows my rules about dogs," Dad said with the blind confidence of a lord who thought he ruled his castle. The elder Hadleys were a 1-dog household. And Chester, their Labrador, had many years ahead of him. Now, about the distribution center. Dad's cell phone chimed with a message. He stared at his phone, swore, and hurried out the door, mumbling something about Chester being his only fur baby. Kevin chuckled, confident Dad would stop Mom from getting a puppy. They were all too busy for new household members, especially this holiday season. Tad hung another car on the ficus next to a twinkling white light. "Can I have a puppy for Christmas?" "All ninjas have puppies." "No." "But, Daddy." Tad returned to Kevin's side and leaned on his thigh, digging his elbows in and smiling for all he was worth. "I'll keep it at your house and take care of it always." No puppies. At least he and Barb could agree on that. Another set of footsteps sounded on the stairs. "Merry Christmas." Everett, his city manager, said hello to Tad and sat down across from Kevin, shedding his jacket and red knit scarf. He was a rangy man, a decade older than Kevin. His brown hair was always shaggy, and his clothes were always rumpled, but he was as good as, if not better than, Kevin when it came to running sunshine. Rosalie is having a huge sale, plus the rescue shelter is running an adoption fair, and I promised her I'd only be gone for 30 minutes. He and his wife were a unified team. Like Barb and I used to be. Or perhaps that had been a lie too. Let's get to it, then. Kevin reached for the folder with his notes on the development project. Heeled footsteps struck the wooden stair treads. I'm sorry I'm late. Barb walked through the door to Kevin's office as if she owned the room. His ex-wife looked as if she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. A hairstylist by trade and the owner of the town's only beauty salon, her blonde, tailored appearance was designed to wow. Funny how no one told me there was a development meeting today. Kevin swallowed his annoyance. Mommy, look. Look. Tad grabbed Barb's hand and tugged her over to the ficus. I'm making Santa a surprise tree. You are indeed. Barb hugged their son and wisely handed him another toy car to prep for hanging. It looks fabulous. But it's not finished, is it? This isn't your meeting, Barb. Kevin suspected she'd been shopping downtown and had seen Everett enter the town hall. He couldn't imagine how else she'd have found out about their appointment. How did you get in? For his own sanity, he was going to have to change the locks on the doors to town hall. Barb didn't bother narrowing her eyes or tossing her hands. She sat down next to Everett and set her ginormous pink leather purse on the floor, slipping out of her thick wool coat. Don't be stubborn, Kev. You're facing a huge issue before Christmas with an election year looming. One wrong choice and you become replaceable, sending our dreams of higher office down the drain. You need me here. The city won't make a wrong choice. But Everett pressed his lips closed at Barb's cold stare. My career and I are fine on our own, Kevin reassured his ex-wife. Ms. Sneed asked us what we want to be when we grow up. Tad had wound so much white pipe cleaner around a car that nothing but the grille and taillights were visible. I'm going to be the mayor. He stretched to hang it on the highest branch. Or a ninja. Honey, you can be anything you want to be. Barb swiped Kevin's paper calendar from his desk and perused December. But if you're going into politics, dream about being president of the United States. She dropped the calendar back on the oak surface. Kevin, really? You've allocated too much time to events hosted by the Sunshine Valley Widows Club. Everyone knows that's the local dating mart. You need to look above all that. Above all what? Kevin said in a hard voice. Barb rolled her expertly lined eyes. Romance. Here comes the kettle, Kevin mumbled, finding a small mint in his desk drawer and taking his time to unwrap it. I'm supposed to be celibate because you couldn't honor our wedding vows? Not that he'd had romance on his mind when he'd agreed to help the Widows Club. Besides, it's only 2 events. He'd agreed to judge a poetry slam at the retirement center and act as MC for a formal ballroom dance. Widows Club events were good for mingling. And mingling earned votes. Barb blinked false eyelashes. Your voting public expects you to be above reproach, like a much-beloved priest. Everett adjusted his glasses, looking like he'd rather be anyplace but in the audience of this post-marital showdown. You're not a priest, Daddy. Tad turned to look at Kevin. You don't have a white collar. From the mouths of babes, Kevin murmured, allowing a Cheshire cat smile to grow on his face. You know what I mean. Barb huffed. Don't give the public a reason not to vote for you. I always followed your advice regarding my political career. Kevin hoped his gaze was turning as hard and closed off as his heart. You've always told me to avoid gossip and bad press, which is why I divorced you. Barb gasped, but it was a princess intake of breath, meant to warn those in her immediate vicinity that she was displeased and that reparations needed to be made. Kevin was done bowing down to Barb. Tad, you and Mommy need to leave. I've got lots of work to do. Kevin closed his calendar. I think Mommy should take you to the Saddle Horn for a mile-high whip. The diner's signature hot chocolate was served with inches of whipped cream on top. Daddy. Tad slid a guarded glance toward his mother. You know mile-high whips are only on Sundays. Tad, Kevin teased, you know they serve them every day on Thanksgiving weekend. You should get one. Ninja mile-high whip. Tad wrestled himself into his jacket. You know we need to limit Tad's calorie intake. Barb didn't budge, not her butt and not her businesslike expression. You can't get rid of me that easily. Mommy. Tad ran out the door and down the stairs. Thanksgiving is special. Kevin shrugged. If you don't want to take him to the Saddle Horn, you might want to check on my parents at the pet store. I think Mom sent a picture of a puppy to Dad via text. And she was shopping for Tad. Oh, for crying out loud. Your mother is too impulsive. Barb hightailed it out of there, leaving Everett and Kevin to get down to business in private. Weeks. His greeting didn't lift Mary Margaret's spirits. Nor did being in the second-hand store, which had aisles packed with a jumble of used merchandise and competitive bargain shoppers. Time is a commodity I'm very short on. Mary Margaret dodged a family of 5 and made her way around an inflatable snowman. She set her purse on the counter and unloaded what she'd brought to sell. I've got my wedding ring. Derek's wedding ring. Had she been wrong not to bury it with him? My great-aunt Bunny's ruby earrings. An old iPod. A flip phone. And she dug around the bottom of her bag, a personal metal detector. Ricky's eyes lit up. Are you looking for your usual? To sell? Not pawn. Yes. She hated that she'd become a regular, selling off possessions to make good on Derek's debt. Material possessions don't define you. Her father's words sounded like they were being delivered from the pulpit. But a few material things can give you comfort in dark times, Dad. She was running out of things to sell. You've been holding out on me, Ricky said on a gasp wheeze. His emphysema made him a man of few words. He placed her jewelry on a scrap of red velvet and thrust his brown checked shirt tails behind him as he leaned over for a closer look. This is better than what you brought me last time. Gasp, gasp. Goodbye, plain wedding band. Goodbye, princess cut diamond and ruby chips. Goodbye, vestiges of a former life. Mary Margaret drew a breath as labored as Ricky's. How much? Gee, I don't know. Ricky regarded her with the same intensity he'd given her possessions, as if trying to suss her level of desperation. Flip phones are actually being made again. The earrings are clip-ons. And your battery's dead on the iPod. It works. I swear. On her husband's grave. Ugh. She sounded in dire need of cash. Take a breath, Mary Margaret. She did. Those earrings are bound to move at the holidays. And the new flip phones open like a book and cost a fortune. Heat scad. I can give you $1,000. 1,000? That's all? I could make more than that in one night. Dancing. She'd financed her college education dancing in a burlesque review at a club outside of Denver. She ran a hand beneath her hairline at the back of her neck, tracing the scar there, hearing her father's damning words. Wicked. Sinful. Her father wasn't shutting up today. I kept my clothes on, Dad. And being good at burlesque is an art form. It was easier to argue years later, especially when she'd only seen her father one time since her college graduation. Mary Margaret rubbed the back of her neck. Performing burlesque was no more risque than the dancing done in most music videos. The moves were suggestive, the costumes cheesy, and some pieces removable. But there were no private parts revealed. Being a burlesque dancer, she reminisced. Those were the days when she hadn't worried about making her money stretch to the next paycheck, when she dreamed of building a life with Mom, away from her controlling father. Burlesque. Was that even trendy anymore? She'd heard about a club opening in nearby Greeley. Ricky stared at Mary Margaret, waiting for her to complete her sentence. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of gossip fodder. I mean, I could make more than that in one night waiting tables at Shaw's Bar and Grill. You wish, Ricky scoffed, knowing that wasn't true. The local bar and honky-tonk appealed to conservative tipping clientele. He sat back on his stool. $1,200. That's my best and final. Fine, but I'm taking back my flip phone. In case she ever needed to disappear, it'd make a good burner phone. Are you sure you don't want to buy a quad? I keep telling you. Gasp wheeze. I've got no floor space. Gasp gasp. Maybe Santa needs one. She walked out of the thrift store with shoulders slumped. Where was she going to find $98,800? With the 100-year-old brick buildings blanketed in snow, downtown sunshine looked charming, challenging Mary Margaret to find some holiday spirit. Watch out! The Bodine twins ran past her on the covered sidewalk toward a cluster of teenage girls at the movie theater. The teens wore Santa hats and sang snatches of Christmas carols as they joined the girls in line for the latest Disney cartoon feature. Bah, humbug! Mary Margaret hurried to her car. The wind was picking up as the sun was setting. She wanted nothing more than to go home, cuddle up in front of the television, and wait for the holidays to end. She passed the 3-story brick shopping mall, which had once been an apartment building with an atrium. They were behind on their holiday prep. 80s pop boomed from their speakers. The dark of night. Music that moved people. Show time. Her steps slowed. She could dance her way out of this. A grand night at a big club. 99 nights. It would take her 3 months, 4, max, and she'd be free and clear. If the thugs were patient. Her gut clenched. Laurel and Hardy didn't strike her as patient types. Besides, she couldn't risk moonlighting as an exotic dancer. If anyone in Sunshine found out, she'd lose her teaching job. There was a morals clause in her contract. Ms. Sneed. Tad Hadley burst out of the town hall and ran over to Mary Margaret with the awkward steps of a growing boy. He hugged her leg and beamed up at her. I miss you. I miss you too, honey. She smoothed his brown curls. Did you have a good Thanksgiving? Tad was in her kindergarten class and a rascal, like Becky Taylor had been last year. Mary Margaret was partial to rascals. Tad patted his stomach. I ate so much pumpkin pie, I almost burst. His jacket was unzipped, ends flapping in the wind. Mary Margaret kneeled to zip him up. When you rack up calories one day, you pay for it the next. Barbara Hadley appeared behind Tad, catalogued Mary Margaret's outfit and sniffed her reluctant approval. She was a stuck-up pill, but she was Mary Margaret's room mother this year, not to mention her beautician and the town's queen bee, a position not lessened by her recent divorce from the mayor. Calories? Mary Margaret couldn't leave Tad undefended. Pumpkin pie has no calories. She tweaked Tad's nose. Kids his age shouldn't worry about things like that. Hey, Barbara, I don't suppose you'd be interested in buying someone a quad for Christmas. Tad gasped. Is it Tad-sized? It wasn't. Mary Margaret shook her head. You asked me that already, Mary Margaret. The answer is still no. Barbara managed to look disapproving without frowning. Plus, her hair didn't move much in the wind, making her appear above mundane emotions, like worry and grief. Barbara took Tad's hand. Come along, Tad. We've got to find your grandparents. And then we can go to the Saddle Horn? Tad asked hopefully. We'll see. Mary Margaret walked with them around the corner, wishing them a Merry Christmas when she reached her car. The pair continued around the next corner in the direction of the pet store. Mary Margaret opened her car door just as her phone buzzed with a text message from Lola Taylor, asking if she wanted to meet at Shaw's for a drink. The answer was an immediate yes and included the wine glass emoji. When creating her payment plan, Mary Margaret had budgeted for 2 wine glasses a week because kindergarten teachers needed to unwind. A few minutes later, Mary Margaret was sitting in a booth at the back of Shaw's with her friends Lola, Darcy Harper, and Avery Blackstone. When she was in Shaw's with her besties, she could pretend that her life was normal and that terms like interest compounded daily didn't scare her. Shaw's had a big stage and a dance floor on one end with padded booths and large wooden tables on the other. A long, narrow bar sat in the middle of Shaw's with stools on both sides. There were license plates on the walls instead of photos or mirrors. Old saddles were mounted on the high rafters. And on Saturday nights, the shells from free peanuts littered the floor. Classy, it was not. Mary Margaret and her friends occupied a booth near the pool table. "I'm so tired of studying for the bar." Blonde hair in a bun at her nape, Darcy clutched her beer stein, her single-carat wedding ring glinting in the dim fluorescent light. "I took the test weeks ago and George still grills me at every opportunity during the day and every night after dinner. I feel like I'm in law school all over again." Trouble in paradise? Avery tossed her straight black hair off the movie theater logo on her navy polo, narrowly missing Mary Margaret. "Is the honeymoon over?"
There was an uncomfortable silence. Avery had broken the unwritten rule of the group. They weren't supposed to ask Darcy intimate details about her unorthodox marriage. Darcy was too young to have married the nearly 80-year-old judge on a whim last spring. He seemed more determined to help Darcy pass the bar than to make her happy. Plus the judge had purged Darcy's wardrobe of anything too feminine or fun. Mary Margaret's chest ached at the robbing of Darcy's independence. But what could she say? "I can tell you how a newlywed sounds." Lola picked up the thread of conversation with a purr and a satisfied smile. Her thick brown hair was braided with strands of tinsel, most likely a product of her stepdaughter's whimsy. "I've never been happier." Darcy chugged her beer. "You've never been happier?" Avery teased, elbowing Mary Margaret. "Even when Drew works on Saturday nights?" "He doesn't work on Sunday mornings." Lola hugged Darcy. "Oh, sweetie, don't worry. You'll work it out with the judge." "How could you not? It's practically Christmas." Avery and Mary Margaret were quick to support that sentiment. The holiday can't fly by fast enough. Noah Shaw, the bar owner, was taping sparkly red garland around the edge of the pool table. "My business is down during the holiday season." He had a point. Other than Mary Margaret and her friends, the only other person in the bar was Kevin Hadley, the town's recently divorced, gorgeous as sin mayor. His thick, dark hair was longish on top, tousled as if a woman had tangled her hands in it. Since his divorce, he'd been sporting a stubbled beard. Just the thought of it scraping across her neck was delicious. "Since when do I look at Tad's father and feel delicious?" Mary Margaret felt a blush coming on. She looked away and drank her wine. If business is so bad, why bother decorating? Avery managed her family's movie theater and had spent all last weekend decorating the lobby. "Because if I don't decorate, I'll get a visit from the Widows Club." Noah stood, looking 100% Colorado cowboy bachelor with his checked shirt, blue jeans, and boots. "And I like being a bachelor operating under their radar." The Widows Club. Mary Margaret had forgotten about them. They'd visited her after Derek died, asking if she needed anything, telling her they'd extend a formal invitation to join their ranks 6 months after Derek's death, but she'd put them off another 6 months. They were a well-intentioned organization, and she shouldn't care that the average age of their membership was 60. But she did care. "I feel old." Mary Margaret's shoulders drooped lower than Darcy's. "What's wrong, Mary Margaret?" Lola reached across the table to give her hand a squeeze. Oh, I know. It's your 1-year widowversary, isn't it? I completely freaked out when mine rolled around. That was the day you discovered Randy had been cheating on you. Avery chuckled. The day we found your husband's blow-up dolls and put them on display in your window. That display drove Drew crazy. Lola's smile turned wicked. Those blow-up dolls had caused an uproar. Small town sunshine had freaked out over what would essentially have been a ho-hum window display in Denver. That's why Mary Margaret couldn't dance her way out of trouble this time. This wasn't Denver. Rest assured. Mary Margaret held up her wine glass for a toast. My widowversary will pass quietly. I'm one of the most invisible residents in town. She'd learned long before she moved to Sunshine that a quiet life was the way to go. Thank you, Dad. They clinked their glasses. But you seem distracted. Newlywed Lola wanted everyone to be as happy as she was. You aren't thinking of Derek, are you? No. I'm not still grieving, if that's what you mean. Thinking about Derek separate from his debt created a dull ache in her chest and a thread of tears in her eyes. Unfortunately, she was more likely to think about him and his debt than just him. Mary Margaret swallowed back the unsettling feeling of trouble on the horizon. I suppose I can tell you a little of the truth, at least. I received a new collection notice today. Her friends sat back in shock. Almost a year after he died? Avery frowned. On a positive note, Darcy looked less glum. Derek shouldn't have opened so many lines of credit in your names. Do you want to head out to the cemetery and rail at him? Lola raised her wine glass. If you do, I'm riding shotgun. Thanks, but... Mary Margaret was touched by their support. Every time I think I've made peace. Every time I think I've finally laid Derek to rest, she paused. What did he buy this time? Avery was intrigued. A fancy gun? A timeshare? It doesn't matter. She didn't want to draw them into her Laurel and Hardy nightmare. I just need to make extra cash. The club in Greeley came to mind once more. Widows don't dance in clubs. 3 weeks ago, Barbara had plucked a gray hair from Mary Margaret's head as she sat in her salon chair. Mary Margaret's shoulders hunched once more. Across from her, Darcy's gaze drifted to a cowboy on crutches coming in the door. Her features closed down tighter than a summer cabin's shutters in winter. It was her ex-boyfriend, rodeo star Jason Petrie. A bull had busted his leg, which was fitting since his womanizing had busted Darcy's heart and propelled her into matrimony with the elderly judge. Let's finish these drinks and get out of here. Mary Margaret slurped her wine. No. Not yet. Darcy caught Mary Margaret's gaze. I heard through the grapevine that Jason's stud business is looking for part-time help while Jason recovers. Manure and bull semen? Lola drained her Chardonnay. Ugh. Darcy rolled her eyes. This from the woman who does hair and makeup at the mortuary. Her expression turned speculative as she looked at Mary Margaret. I know you have a full schedule with teaching, but your nights and weekends are free. And I heard through the grapevine. Truly, Sunshine had the best grapevine ever, as long as the gossip wasn't about you. That Jason's business partner Iggy needs someone in the late afternoon and evenings. I don't know. Mary Margaret had promised to help with the elementary school's Christmas pageant, not to mention she had to watch out for Grandma Edith, who'd been taking Grandpa Charlie's death pretty hard. Go on, Lola encouraged. She waved her empty wine glass in the direction of Jason, who was hobbling toward a seat at the bar next to Kevin. Ask Jason for a job. What have you got to lose? Kevin sat in Shaw's watching a college football game on television. He played quarterback in high school and college. He enjoyed the strategy of the game. What he didn't enjoy was being outwitted. Blindsided, the quarterback on TV missed a defensive read and was sacked. Kevin may have been blindsided by Barb's infidelity, but he was going to be bulletproof when he ran for state office. That is, if the distribution center lived up to expectations and raised Sunshine's standard of living. A memory of his grandfather returned. The summer Grandpa had run for governor. They'd stopped in a poor suburb outside Denver and barbecued hot dogs during a meet and greet. The line had been down the block. And it had been a long block. "Why are there so many people in line?" 8-year-old Kevin had asked. "It's just a hot dog. For some of these people, that hot dog is all they'll get to eat today." His grandfather had knelt in front of Kevin. "Those of us lucky enough to have a full fridge need to help those who aren't so lucky. It's a responsibility, just like you being Vanessa's older brother and watching out for her." Those words and their meaning had stuck with Kevin. The more you had, the bigger the responsibility to give back. Now that Grandpa was gone, it was more important than ever to carry on his legacy. The stool next to him listed to one side as Jason Petrie tried to belly up to the bar with his broken leg. A clatter of crutches, a scrape of stool footings, and the blonde, blue-eyed cowboy had half his butt on the seat. His casted leg rested gracelessly to the side. Noah had a beer in front of Jason before the cowboy released a put-upon sigh or had time to glance over his shoulder at his ex-girlfriend. "Darcy. Before you start off with your smarmy metaphors and cliches, Kev." Jason paused to sample his beer. "Remember that I'm the only guy in town who shows up to drink with you. And wasn't that a sad state of affairs?" Kevin signaled Noah for another whiskey. He'd been nursing his first for 30 minutes, and he was walking home. "I have no life. Good mayors rarely do." Jason drank some more beer. "You're like priests. Nobody trusts priests who get out there and have a life. Either." Kevin scowled at him, annoyed that Jason's opinion mirrored his ex-wife's, doubly so when he realized they were both right. If he was ever going to reactivate his social life, he needed a steady girlfriend, someone as boring as he was, someone who was never the talk of the town, someone who wouldn't ruin his political chances. "Excuse me." Mary Margaret Sneed picked up Jason's crutches and leaned them against the bar. She wore blue jeans, tall black boots, and a chunky fisherman's sweater that hinted at her curves. She had a full mane of red hair, a pair of tender blue eyes, and was like the Pied Piper when it came to making children behave. "I hate to interrupt, Jason, but I heard you might be hiring part-time workers." "Yep." Jason patted his walking cast beyond the fringe where he'd cut off one leg of his blue jeans. "The logistics of bull semen collection, storage, and order fulfillment are not what the doctor ordered for another few weeks." "Whereas drinking beer is," Kevin murmured. Mary Margaret and Jason both paused to look at him. Kevin stared into his whiskey glass. "I'm looking for a part-time gig," Mary Margaret continued in that church girl voice of hers. "But I can't work until after school during the week." Jason gave her another once-over. "Didn't you know? Iggy is a vampire. He and the bulls do all their best work after happy hour." While Jason explained the horrors of collecting bull semen, storing it with proper labeling in cryogenic units, and shipping it out, Kevin studied Mary Margaret out of the corner of his eye. She was the complete opposite of his ex-wife. Soft-spoken, openly kind, stable. The type of woman a man who was one step from the priesthood would date. It didn't hurt that she was beautiful or that she knew how to dress well enough to fit in but not loud enough to stand out. He'd seen her circulate in a crowd and not steal the limelight from anyone. She checked a lot of boxes. And if he looked at the soft bow of her mouth, he could imagine kissing her. And if he imagined kissing her, he could imagine pressing the length of that long, tall body of hers against his. And if he could imagine that, well. Kevin sipped his drink and used to envisioning getting physical with one of his constituents, especially his son's kindergarten teacher. He snuck another glance at her. At that thick curtain of red hair, at her creamy skin, at the delicate way her fingers interlocked and squeezed intermittently as she listened to Jason. Kevin swallowed thickly. With all this talk of the priesthood, a switch had been flipped inside him. It had been months since he'd burned the sheets with a woman. He could probably look at any single woman and imagine. He glanced over his shoulder at Avery. She was single and his age. Mary Margaret's conservative work clothes didn't vary much from the outfits she wore to Shaw's. When Avery wasn't wearing her theater uniform, she chose clothes that showcased curves and skin. But as much as he stared, he couldn't imagine getting busy with Avery. His attention shifted back to Mary Margaret, to intelligent blue eyes and a soft laugh. She shifted her feet, and then he couldn't stop thinking about her long legs. Noah, he croaked, a dying man in need of a sanity-leveling drink. He held up his empty glass. What was taking Noah so long? Maybe this awareness of Mary Margaret was a good thing. She was a conservative member of the community, never any trouble to anyone. Dating her would be better than drinking at Shaw's with Jason. Noah topped off his drink. Kevin took a sip, forcing his gaze to the football game on television. Mary Margaret and Jason finished their job discussion, but she lingered. Just by chance, she gave the men a hopeful smile. "Can I interest any of you in the purchase of a quad?" That was a triple no. Not Kevin. Not Noah. Not Jason. Never hurts to ask. With a self-deprecating smile, she returned to the back booth. "I heard a new club opened in Greeley." "I need some action," Jason said, without specifying what kind. "Me too." Kevin downed his whiskey and said, "Let's go." "Hey, are you interested in the mayor?" Lola pulled Mary Margaret aside in Shaw's parking lot as Avery and Darcy continued toward their SUVs. The snow clouds had moved on, but the air remained cold enough to chill Mary Margaret's throat. It just wasn't as chilling as Lola's question. "I'm not interested in Kevin." "Why would you ask?" Lola shrugged. "When you were talking to Jason, Kevin was looking at you like, you know. Like I'm his kid's teacher?" Which she was. "No. Shoot. Like I'm one of his loyal voting public?" Which she was. "No," Lola grimaced. "It was just a look, all right. And I just got this vibe. I would never." Kevin was handsome in a white-bread politician kind of way. Or at least, that used to label his look. He had more of an edge to him now that Barbara wasn't cutting his hair, and yes, Mary Margaret occasionally let her mind wander in that direction. When she saw an attractive man, but it was never a serious fear from the celibate widow in financial trouble path. She didn't have on her guy-finding glasses. Besides, Barbara cuts my hair. By that fact alone, Mary Margaret was Team Barbara. Exactly. Lola nodded. And Barbara doesn't act like she's over Kevin. She dogs his every step around town. I know. Most everyone knew. You don't want to cross her. Lola shivered and hugged herself. I'm just saying. I didn't pick up on signals from Kevin the way you did. I was talking to Jason about the job. Which seemed to involve labeling vials of collected goods and making sure they didn't spoil in storage or shipment. It was practically postal work. Right up Mary Margaret's alley, if not for being mere pennies in the bucket of Derek's debt. Down the block, a few holiday lights outlined the gables of some houses, trying to convey holiday cheer. Mary Margaret wasn't heartened. She imagined casino thugs waiting outside the glow of twinkle lights, perhaps even in the shadows of her front porch. Chapter 3. When Mary Margaret got home, she locked the knob on her front door, slid the deadbolt home, and set the chain. Finally, she felt safe. I was wondering when you'd get home. Mary Margaret jumped half out of her skin, whirling around. Too late, she registered it was her auburn-haired grandmother. Grandma. Edith, how did you get in here? You gave me a key, remember? Edith held it up next to her grin. She stood at the kitchen counter, wearing pink snow pants and a pink sweatshirt. Her white snow boots were tucked in the cubby near the front door, which was why Mary Margaret hadn't seen them. Mary Margaret sucked in much-needed air. You can't just come into my home without telling me. What if Laurel and Hardy broke in and found her here? Why not? I brought you dinner. She started the microwave, rising on tiptoe to reach the buttons. Turkey mixed in with my leftover green bean casserole. And I brought in some of your Christmas boxes from the garage so you can decorate. It was pointless to argue with her grandmother. Edith pretty much did whatever she wanted to, and since she was a well-meaning little dear, Mary Margaret let her. Mary Margaret's rented one-bedroom bungalow was only 600 square feet. The Christmas boxes were stacked next to the couch because there was no room for them elsewhere. She opened one. It didn't contain Christmas decorations. The box was full of her burlesque costumes. Red sequined polyester glittered in the light. The lights, the music, the sense that she owned the crowd. How could you? Dad had demanded, red-faced, drawing back his fist to strike. Mary Margaret closed the box, shutting out the painful memories. Turn on some music. Grandma Edith did a little shoulder shimmy. Let's dance. I don't think so. Mary Margaret eyed the box with the costumes. Come on. Grandma Edith added a grapevine to her shimmy. Remember how we used to dance? Like no one was watching? You. And I have moves. That might have been an overstatement. Grandma Edith had rhythm and enthusiasm, rather than pop and soul. The only reason they'd started dancing together was because Grandma Edith had used her key shortly after Mary Margaret had moved to town. She'd stumbled upon Mary Margaret going through the general motions of a burlesque routine. Instead of being appalled, Grandma Edith had joined in. It had become their thing. They'd danced while cooking holiday dinners and baking cookies for fundraisers. They'd danced when Grandpa Ham went hunting or fishing with his pals. They'd danced any time they were happy. I haven't felt like dancing in a long time, Mary Margaret admitted, trying not to look at the box of costumes. I know we haven't danced in over a year. The microwave finished, and her grandmother halted her simple moves. But that needs to change. We have that Widows Club ballroom dancing fundraiser coming up. Edith had mentioned Mary Margaret's dance skill to Mims, who'd recruited her to teach people the waltz and tango in the hour prior to the Christmas ball's official beginning. Ballroom didn't require the all-out joy of burlesque, not for Mary Margaret, but she'd done her duty and agreed to their request. After I teach, I'll probably be a wallflower at the ball. Mary Margaret said, skating the edge of self-pity. You and I aren't wallflowers, Edith replied with certainty. And we will dance again someday. They ate in the small dining nook adjacent to the equally small living room. Derek's 70-inch television sat on the floor and occupied the entire living room wall. She'd been unable to return it or sell it for anything close to what Derek had paid for it. I'm proud to announce I'm officially on the Widows Club board. Grandma Edith fidgeted, as if she was bursting with the news. And as your vice president, I'm sure I'm going to need your help. Uh-oh. I don't know if I can spare the time. Mary Margaret speared a green bean. I'm trying to land a part-time job. Oh, honey. You don't need to save up to buy me anything special for Christmas. Grandma Edith was a bit self-centered, living life with blinders on like some of Mary Margaret's kindergartners. She'd probably forgotten all about Derek's debt. Although I did see a Lovely pair of ruby earrings just like Great Aunt Bunny's at the thrift store this afternoon. Wouldn't it be great if we had a matched set? She sighed dreamily. Guilt stabbed at Mary Margaret's chest. Or you can just re-gift Bunny's earrings to me. Edith grinned. I don't think you've worn them more than once since Lola found the missing one last spring. If Mary Margaret went back to Ricky, he'd charge her retail for those clip-on earrings and their ruby chips. You need a Christmas tree in here. Edith's gaze roamed over the small space. And mistletoe. That'd give a man an excuse to steal a smooch. Mary Margaret thought of Kevin and that scruffy stubble. Smooch wouldn't describe that man's kiss. I miss your grandpa. Edith sat back in her seat and hugged herself, her smile one of rare melancholy. Don't you miss Derek? Mary Margaret turned her gaze toward her wedding picture on the wall, toward joyful smiles and warm embraces. She and Derek had just been starting out their lives together, crazy in love, a clean slate between them and the future. I miss the man in the picture. She missed the promises he'd made to her. In sickness and in health. For richer or poorer. Something inside of her pinched at a memory. You forgive me, don't you? Derek had rasped on his deathbed. She'd assured him she had, thinking he was asking for absolution for running away with Karina. She'd had no idea what was to come. Nearly a year later, that forgiveness was being tested. But at least I forgave him. Her parents, a preacher and his wife, hadn't forgiven Mary Margaret for dancing during college. But it wasn't as if anyone in her father's congregation knew about it, unlike Derek's indiscretion. His trip to Vegas had fueled the town grapevine for weeks. I miss Charlie, Grandma Edith said. But sometimes I wonder. Dramatic sigh. Dramatic pause. Dramatic use of sorrowful eyes. Grandma Edith is up to something. This was nothing new. Grandma Edith was always up to something. Do you think that vulnerability lined Grandma Edith's eyes, along with tentative excitement? Do you think I should date again? Grandpa Charlie was nearly 10 months in the grave, and Derek nearly 12. Was dating even appropriate yet? Mary Margaret set down her fork. Define date. Because with Grandma Edith that could encompass anything from sitting next to a widower at a widows' club meeting to running off to Reno tomorrow to get married. You know. Grandma Edith's mouth worked into a wobbly line. Go out places. With a man. Sit in front of the fire at home. With a man. Be given flowers and chocolates and taken to nice restaurants for dinner. By a man. Just the other day, Mims told me that eventually the complacent solitude of being a widow will give way to loneliness. Aren't you lonely? Again, Mary Margaret thought of Kevin and his stubbled, chiseled chin. Mary Margaret? Grandma Edith was impatient for her answer. No. I'm not lonely. And that wasn't the point. Nowhere in her grandmother's definition had she mentioned love. If dating fills your day and makes you happy, go right ahead. Although the dating pool was rather thin for men Edith's age in Sunshine. There's a difference between the solitude of being a widow and ready-to-date loneliness, don't you think? Again, Grandma Edith's gaze was the curious mix of vulnerability and excitement. But then she scoffed. All this talk of my dating. Edith took Mary Margaret's hand. I bet you're ready to put yourself out there. No, Mary Margaret didn't have to think twice. Not now. I'm still cleaning up the financial mess from my marriage. Trying as hard as she could to avoid bankruptcy and broken legs. Derek broke your heart completely. There were tears in Edith's eyes. Derek broke something, Mary Margaret muttered. He'd nearly broken her. She'd loved her husband, but now it was hard to remember being in love with him. Edith flipped the grumpy switch. It'd be nice if we two widows tested the dating waters together. I thought going on a double date would be fun. No, Mary Margaret repressed a horrified shudder mid-spine. But her grandmother wasn't done. I thought we could help each other through this holiday. Go the party rounds together. Join the Victorian choir that sings in the town square. Get our nails done at Pretty Toes. Edith got to her feet. I guess I'm as alone as I was the day I buried your grandfather. Guild made another stab at Mary Margaret's chest. That's not fair. Grandma Edith stomped toward the door. I was going to ask you to go to the poetry slam with me at the retirement home on Tuesday, but, I guess. How much is a ticket? Mary Margaret asked before she could stop herself. $5. Edith thrust her arms in her jacket. Pick me up at 6:30. I'll pick up the toys to donate at the event and get you some mistletoe. Mims says the best way to move on is to find a new man. And you can't just open your door and find one waiting on the stoop. She stepped into her snow boots and then opened the front door. Who are those men parked in front of your house? She pointed at Laurel and Hardy in their big sedan. They look like undercover cops. Ignore them. Mary Margaret was going to as soon as she handed over a check with her first payment. She closed the door and watched through the peephole as her grandmother walked away. Only when Grandma Edith was out of sight did Mary Margaret go outside and approach the town car. Mr. Laurel rolled down the passenger window, red stir stick protruding from his mouth like an unlit cigarette. Was that your granny or your housekeeper? There was something lilting about his words, a trace of a long-forgotten accent. My grandmother. She passed over her check. Ha! Mr. Laurel tossed her payment toward his partner and then punched the man's shoulder. You owe me $20. Mr. Hardy rolled with the punch and scrutinized Mary Margaret's draft as if it might be a forgery. How soon can you make another payment? Maybe next weekend? I'm trying to find part-time work. Have you tried cleaning houses? Mr. Laurel seemed sincere in his suggestion. No. I have a job interview Monday with a local breeding outfit. You should try cleaning houses. Mr. Laurel wasn't giving up on his idea. You can steal things to fence. You have a trusting face and could probably get by saying they must have misplaced something. Mary Margaret choked on cold air. Mr. Hardy snorted and started the car. Make sure the next payment is more substantial. Or what? Mary Margaret returned to her house under a heavy drape of fear. Even if she got the job with Jason and Iggy, even if she asked for an advance on her salary from them, she wasn't going to make more than $1,000 in a week. She wasn't going to satisfy Laurel and Hardy. She huddled on the sofa wondering what to do. Dancing had kept her on her feet before. And estranged her parents. She shouldn't do it, but, could she? She was cold, iced over by indecision. But she had to do something. Mary Margaret stared at the box of costumes, losing a debate with herself. Now, this is more like it, Jason shouted in Kevin's ear. Kevin preferred the relative quiet of Shaw's. The two men had gone out looking for action and ended up at a small circular table next to a wall in the recently opened burlesque club in Greeley. The pop music was loud. His vodka tonic was watered down, and it didn't even have ice. The woman on stage wore a neon yellow bikini and struck poses beneath a strobe light. She looked like she should be home studying vocabulary words for her college entrance exams. Fighting a headache, Kevin stared into his drink. When Jason had proposed coming here, the cowboy had said he'd been to burlesque clubs in other cities. He'd said the dancing was good, and after the show was over, the audience got to grooving together on a dance floor. Not that Jason and his broken leg were going to be cutting a rug. Not that Kevin planned to dance either. He wasn't the kind of guy who danced in public, preferring to sit on the sidelines and watch. The Hanky Panky was the only nightclub of any kind for 100 miles. It was busy but not packed. In the far corner, a group of women wearing pink "I'm with the bride" t-shirts were served a tray of blended piña coladas. Among the men, there was a mixture of cowboy hats, tractor logo caps, and business haircuts. How many of them were here unbeknownst to their spouses? The thought brought him up short. Barbara's infidelity had left him jaded toward relationships. So, no. He wasn't going to cruise the club looking for female companionship. It looked like the best thing about this spur of the moment trip was that Kevin had gotten out of sunshine and the watchful eyes of Barb and her beauty shop minions. Jason was bobbing his head to the beat and tapping his fingers on the table as if he was into the post-performer's strobe dance. But then again, as a rodeo bull rider, he'd probably suffered a concussion or three, and it wouldn't take much to capture his attention. Let's give it up for Dee Dee. First times are tough, aren't they? The announcer stood just outside the wings of the main stage. We've got another hanky-panky newbie coming up. We all wanna be starting something with Foxy Roxy. Foxy Roxy? Kevin groaned. That had to be the worst stripper name ever. Or it would have been if this had been the type of establishment where women stripped. The removal of clothes might have made the experience better. Kevin downed his drink and nudged Jason's shoulder. Come on. Let's go. The beat of the song shook the walls, and then a woman thrust the red center stage curtains aside and stood there as if waiting for her. Do notice me. Kevin did. And so did the rest of the crowd. There had been attractive women on stage earlier, but none of them had owned the audience the way this woman did with just one pose. Which made no sense because she wore a short red dress trimmed with white fur that covered the essentials. Sure, she had on the requisite towering heels, also red, and yes, she had on a black superhero mask that concealed her identity. She didn't move, unless you counted her gaze, which assessed the audience members one by one. Her inspection reached Kevin. He held his breath and leaned forward in his seat, along with every other person in the room she'd connected that intense gaze with. Watch me. Foxy Roxy strutted forward, lifting her knees and swinging her hips and hands. She was more animated than a runway model and less in-your-face sexy than the last dancer, but she was smokin' hot. She reached the pole and did the standard circuits, swinging her feet around in the air, swinging her hand close to the men sitting in a ring around the stage. Her hand flattened around green bills, which she slowly tucked into her cleavage the way a man copped a feel. Kevin's mouth went dry. She slid to her heels with her back to the pole and then straightened her legs, keeping her back flat and parallel to the floor. Again, a standard stripper move. Again, she owned it differently, turning in small increments and capturing the gaze of every person in the audience as she rotated around that pole. Kevin reached for his wallet even as Jason produced a 20. But neither of them had to approach the stage. With a high kick, she was off the platform and dancing through the crowd. Her hands outlined her curves as if showing how she wanted to be touched. And then she did the same to every member of the audience. Tracing. Touching. Teasing. Possessing. Possess me. The High Plains, Colorado crowd had never seen anything like Foxy Roxy. She accepted her due with hands that never dropped $1. Not that she was given any George Washingtons. Kevin registered a lot of 20s and 50s. And then she was at his table, arching her back, lowering to a crouch, swiveling provocatively. She straightened and moved behind Kevin before he could blink, running her palms over his shoulders, to his elbows, reaching for hands as her breath wafted over his ear. She tucked his 50 into the stiff red fabric holding her cleavage and moved on to trace Jason's face with her hands. And then she stepped around behind him, fingertips pausing on Jason's neck, as if she were taking his pulse. Kevin's was through the roof. What's happening to me? She was touching another man, and Kevin was turned on. Their gazes connected over Jason's straw cowboy hat, hers a surprising blue. Her eyes widened slightly, and then she strutted her way to the stage with a swing of white blonde hair streaked with one strand of red. The roar of appreciation was deafening. The bridal party in the back was howling for an encore. Several of Kevin's body parts clenched. Sweat broke out on his forehead. What just happened? He felt as if he were a teenager and had just had a hot makeout session in the backseat of his car only to be busted by the cops. Before. A voice inside his head, one that sounded a lot like Barbara's, said, "What are you doing in a club like that? What if someone recognizes you?" The DJ began to play dance music. The women in the bridal party were snatched up like free food at a golf tournament. Neither Jason nor Kevin was going home with a woman tonight, certainly not the masked and mysterious Foxy Roxy. But what would it be like to take that woman home? Kevin sucked in air, reminding himself he was the chaste mayor, the proverbial minister of town hall, the man with political aspirations. Just being here was risky. Taking a woman like that anywhere? Political suicide. Time to go, Jason. Kevin did his best to be invisible, to gather Jason and try to inconspicuously walk out the door. Impossible. When escorting a cowboy on crutches, especially one who wouldn't shut up.